Hey guys, Holy Messiah here, and in this video I will be ranking all of the seasons of Diablo 4 so far. Well, the ones that I played anyway. I jumped into Diablo 4 at the start of Season 3, so since I didn't play the first two seasons, they will be absent from this video. In almost 2 years between Season 3 and now, Diablo 4 has gone a long way. If you started playing when the game launched and then continued today, you might hardly recognize it. We have had complete overhauls of almost every single game system, starting from loot in Season 4 to difficulty and stats in Season 6, and we're getting even more massive changes when Season 11 hits. And as the dust settled, with the recent Season 11 PTR and a new expansion looming on the horizon, I figured this would be a perfect opportunity to rank all of these seasons based on the amount of impact they had on the overall game. Some criteria I will be using are how impactful the season was, quality and quantity of things they brought to the game, how fun it felt to play during the season, and also just my personal feel as well. So needless to say, this list is going to be subjective based on my own opinion, but I will try to substantiate it with facts. Not only will I rank the seasons from 8th to 1st, but I will also put them into a dedicated tier list that I made as well. Sounds fun? Then join me as we discuss the game's journey so far and put it into a perspective. And if you like this kind of videos and enjoy Diablo content, then like the video and sub to the channel as it really helps me out a ton. Anyway, let's get straight to it. So here is the tier list that I made for the video. Diablo 4 seasons from Season 3 to Season 10. Before we dive into the rankings, I just want to clarify that I don't think there are any bad seasons in Diablo 4, so the lowest I will rank them is going to be Tier C. However, I do think there are quite a few of mediocre ones. Number 8. Seasons of the Horadrim, Season 9. Speaking of mediocre seasons, coming up dead last is the previous season of the game, Season 9 Sins of the Horadrim, that ran from 1st of July to 23rd of September 2025. Season 9 brought some much needed improvements to Nightmare Dungeons, a game feature that went largely unchanged throughout the game's run. It introduced a lot of interesting and fresh modifiers with better rewards and harder challenges. It also introduced new Horadric strongrooms as well as escalating Nightmare Dungeons, along with a new boss, Astaroth. During the PTR for the season, I wasn't initially sold on strongrooms. I found them to be too clunky and boring, but over time they grew on me. They quickly became the best way to farm for Obdicite and were also rewarding in different ways as well. Escalating dungeons felt fresh, and Astaroth was a really cool boss. So what's the problem with the season? One recurring theme with Diablo 4 season development is the half-measure approach to doing things, which I will reference later as well. For instance, in the season of Nightmare Dungeons, not showing an active whisper on the sigils, something that only came in the next season, is definitely an oversight. The point is that the changes never seem to be too ambitious, instead they go for the just enough approach. Nightmare Dungeons had so much potential, something that I talked about a lot in previous videos. I really feel they have the option to carry the game due to their sheer variety, and I felt there was so much more that could have been done with them. And while the dungeons really were fun, in the very next season they became almost entirely obsolete, with majority of sigil modifiers being completely worthless. Strongrooms were also nerfed heavily, providing no reason for players to bother with them. And escalating nightmares, while a really cool idea, should have continued to escalate to at least several more tiers to really feel impactful. So since I am using impact as one of the criteria for these seasons, the legacy they leave behind is important. But all of this pales in comparison to the by far the largest issue the Season 9 had, and what cements its place as the very worst: botting and duping. If you've been a fan of my channel, you know that I talked about this before, and I even have a dedicated video where I addressed this very issue. This has been a persistent problem in Diablo 4 ever since the game launched, but it peaked in Season 9 and it has gotten to such ridiculous heights that if you wanted to upgrade a piece of your gear late game, you would have to buy it with tens of thousands of legendary runes, which themselves, of course, were also duped. Insanity. This completely derailed the average player experience, and not only that, but as the entire game was balanced around dupe items and materials, players were essentially stuck in layer boss jail, farming Belial over and over again in order to be competitive. It fucking sucked, and that's why this season is dead last in my book. You might have noticed that I also didn't mention seasonal powers too much. It was a decent system, but didn't really excite me too much, nor did I find it memorable. Here's C. Number 7. Season of Hatred Rising. Season 6. For the second last place, we're going with Season of Hatred Rising. It launched concurrently with West of Hatred on October 8, 2024. The season ended on January 21st, 2025. Do note that we are not talking about patch 2.0 that came along with Vessel of Hatred and introduced Tormenteers and other changes to the gameplay. You're just looking at the season on its own merit. Season 6 was home to some pretty interesting new mechanics in the game, most notably by adding the giant realm walkers from Diablo 3 that rummage around the open world in a very slow pace until finally rooting at a predetermined location. Once arriving, they could finally be harmed and killed, and by slaying them, players could enter the portals that were located on the backs of these giant beasts. This sounds very interesting and fun, sure, but the main problem with the Realm Walkers was how slow they moved and how tedious it was to essentially escort them to the designated location over and over again. Later patches increased their move speed significantly, but it still didn't help not to feel like a slog. Season 6 also introduced another interesting mechanic, the Opals. Consumables that offered deterministic bonuses for monster kills, such as extra gold, equipment, gems, and more. Another interesting idea that seems fun the first week or two in the season, but drops off very quickly. Maintaining the opal buffs also felt quite bothersome, and the only way to get more opals was to engage with the Realm Walkers. So all in all, I have to say that despite good intentions from devs to spice things up for Season 6, and despite some interesting new ideas, ultimately, for me, it mostly fell flat. I didn't really enjoy the Realm Walker mechanic, and while the opal buffs were interesting, keeping them up constantly was annoying. The season also had no other interesting mechanics, powers, or anything else really to steal the spotlight. It was just enough content for the season to feel fresh with all the new changes from patch 2.0, and added even more content for Vessel of Hatred owners that already got a brand new class and a zone to play with. But season as a whole was overall not impressive, so I will put it at the bottom of tier B. Number 6. Season of Infernal Hordes. Season 5. Season of the Infernal Hordes was the 5th season of Diablo 4. It ran from August 6th to August 8th, 2024. Season 5 had big expectations as it came directly after a hugely successful Season 4. Just as the name implies, Season 5 introduced Infernal Hordes to the game, a brand new activity meant to further diversify Diablo 4's endgame. Infernal Hordes were unlike anything in the game at that point. A survival, one-room dungeon where players fight increasingly harder waves of demons. After every wave, players can further juice up the difficulty but also the rewards as well. While the PTR for Season 5 was initially fairly mild, Blizzard juiced up Infernal Hordes rewards and difficulty substantially for the live version, and general player feedback was very positive. I myself have always enjoyed Infernal Hordes, and ever since they were introduced in Season 5, they have been one of the strongest activities in the game, even more so in Season 10. Other than Hordes themselves, Season 5 also introduced a mini Infernal Horde dungeon activity that spawned across the map, that also had the option to choose several boons and banes and collect Aether. This activity was exclusive to that season. While Infernal Hordes are great, Season 5 also had a really great questline, which was one of my favorites. Most season questlines tend to be weak and forgettable, but for this season, I found myself really enjoying it. Voice acting was also very strong, especially for the character of Lokran.
By mother's blood, by mother's strength, we seize her Lord Father's hatred. We tear it from this broken vessel and cast it back to the abyss!
It's easy to sometimes not pay attention to it, but great voice acting is often an undervalued asset in a video game. And while I'm not saying that it's the best voice acting ever, it was way above average for a seasonal character that we will likely never see again. Other notable change in the season includes the introduction of 15 new unique items in the game, which help to keep the gameplay fresh, and also a rework of mythic uniques, previously called Uber uniques, rebranding them and giving them a now familiar purple glow on drop. While Season of Infernal Hordes didn't have new seasonal mechanics or powers, it continued upon a strong foundation of Season 4 by introducing one of the flagship activities in the game that is still very popular to this day. However, compared to its predecessor, it was lacking in terms of general sweeping changes to the base game. B tier. Number 5. Belial's Return, Season 8. Belial's Return. This is probably my first more subjective entry on this list. Belial's Return is the 8th season of Diablo 4. It launched on April 29th and ended on July 1st, 2025. For Season 8, developers took a closer look at the boss ladder system and decided to do a major rework to it. 3 new bosses have been added. Urivar from the campaign serves as a Tier 1 boss, along with Warshan, Grigor, and Beast in Ice. Harbinger of Hatred, the final boss of the Vessel of Hatred campaign, is the Tier 2 boss in the same vein as Duriel and Andariel. And they also introduced Belial as the sole Tier 3 pinnacle boss in the game. I loved the new bosses. I always felt Urivar had a lot of potential and that he was wasted in the campaign, so seeing him come back to the base game was very cool. Harbinger of Hatred is another really cool boss, and I like that they tried something new with him and introduced new mechanics that you need to interact with in order to kill him. And then Belial. Perhaps the coolest boss fight from Diablo 3 is back again. Great choice for the final boss in the game. Other than adding new bosses, materials for summoning have also been streamlined. Before Season 8, there were all kinds of random and arbitrary numbers for materials needed to summon the bosses. But now, all bosses of the same tier share the same number of mats needed. Not only that, but for Tier 2 bosses and above, we no longer need 2 different kinds of materials. These were important quality of life changes that made the boss ladder system a lot more fluid and easier to interact with. But the most important change of them all, however, is the way boss summoning worked. Previously, we had to pay the material cost upfront to summon the boss. And because the boss difficulty was always a bit different, there was no way to know if your build can handle the boss before you actually summon it. So it was entirely possible to find out that the boss you summoned is just too hard, but you already wasted mats to summon it. Not only that, but the old system encouraged a lot of bad manner practices from players such as leeching. Because all players would get the loot regardless of who summoned the boss, player rotation runs were a popular way to stretch out your mats and make them last longer. But there were inevitably always players that tried to leech off others and get the loot without putting in mats. So they designed a new system that allows us to summon the bosses for free, and then we open the loot chest with materials instead. Very simple, elegant solution to all of these pain points. And it worked like a charm. Leeching is gone, as is the wondering of whether you can handle the bosses on the difficulty you're on. The only downside is that rotation runs are also pretty much gone, which further incentivizes slaying the bosses solo as opposed in a group. The system was not without issues, however. The introduction of husks as a material opened the door to a lot of duping and botting issues, similar ones we had in Season 9. Belial fight was extremely good for players. You could instantly kill Belial if he had enough damage, and it was the best source of pretty much everything. Whether it's unique items, forgotten souls, high runes, mythics, you name it. This turned husks into a perfect dupe target. A single item that can be converted into pretty much everything you need by doing Belial over and over again. This had a very negative effect on overall player experience, as we were essentially forced to do hundreds upon hundreds of Belial kills to upgrade our gear, which got tiresome real quickly. Not only that, but Belial suffers from a lack of identity. Remember when I talked about devs taking a half-measure approach to doing things? They introduced a very cool boss in Belial, but then you kill him and he drops 0 loot unique to him? Instead, he just emulates loot tables from other existing bosses? I really think that was a poor decision from the dev team. Furthermore, this was a perfect opportunity to introduce even more quality of life features. Players have been asking for an anvil in the boss rooms for ages. Something that can be used to instantly salvage all of the crap gear that we get while being forced to kill Belial over and over and over again with our duped stacks of husks. Here's how the average Belial farming experience looked like in Season 8 for me. So that was what we had to do. Run Belial, drop all the non-ancestral items, go to town to salvage the rest, rinse and repeat. It was not fun. Speaking of things that were fun in Season 8, boss powers. I fucking love them. And they are the sole reason why Season 8 is not ranked lower. I know, powers have been memed to death, I get it. But if they're already in the game, then Season 8 showed a very good blueprint on how they should be made. They were impactful, flashy, powerful. Everything you want seasonal mechanics to be. Whether you're channeling Wandering Depths, Chest Beam, attacking with Lilith's spikes, or even burrowing on the ground like Duriel, Season 8 made you feel cool as fuck. And yes, the powers were probably a bit overtuned, but I had a blast collecting and using them, and they really fit the overall theme of the season. One seasonal feature I did not care too much about, however, were the Apparition Incursion events. I thought they were quite boring, and the second I picked up all of the powers, I never really bothered with them again. I always welcome more efforts to make players interact with the open world, but that one was not it. And lastly, Season 8 also reworked season passes into reliquaries, which is an entire different can of worms that I will not touch upon right now. B tier. Number 4. Season of the Construct. Season 3. Season of the Construct was the third season of Diablo 4. It launched on January 23rd, 2024 and concluded on May 14th. The season theme was around mecha enemies and allies of Zoltan Kulle, yet another asset from Diablo 3 being given a new life in Diablo 4. The general sentiment most people have with Season 3 is that it was among the weakest ones. I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit biased about this season as it was my first experience with the game itself. But even with that aside, I don't really understand why people seem to dislike it. I always thought it featured some really unique mechanics that made the game a lot of fun. And if anything, the game would benefit if some of them made a return. Well, let's start from the beginning. Season 3's storyline revolves around two mages, Ejuzan and Zoltan Kulle. Ejuzan is a member of the Ennead clan, who, along with Zoltan Kulle, had taken constructs created by the Viserai mage clans and made them their own by using a powerful tool they constructed called the Loom, deep within the vault. They originally planned to develop these constructs as weapons against the Burning Hells, but their plans were corrupted by a powerful demon, Malphas, who serves as the main antagonist in the season. Zoltan Kulle is no stranger to Diablo fans, as he served as a foil to our character in the second act of Diablo 3. In Season 3, we gain access to the Gatehole. The Gatehole serves as a gateway to visiting the vaults, and as a main central hub for various seasonal activities. Speaking of the vaults, they were a new type of dungeon in Season 3 and they came in 4 flavors: Vault of Cinders, Vault of the Loom, Vault of Ink, and Vault of Stone. Vaults, in my opinion, are some of the best things Diablo devs ever did. They were interactive dungeons where the actual environment itself was hostile, filled with hazards. Spiked floors, vents of poison, and beams of fire were all a staple of the vaults. This offered a very different style of gameplay than what we were accustomed to. Vaults, just like Nightmare Dungeons at the time, used monster level as a means to scale the difficulty, going all the way to 154. For reference, normal monsters and players were capped to level 100. Vaults had their own sigils that could be activated in the same way as the ones from the Nightmare Dungeons. Every vault had a statue of Zoltan Kulle, where you could offer something called a Pearl of Warding. Each pearl granting you 10 stacks of buff called Zoltan's Warding. This buff granted extra rewards if you finished the dungeon, but there's a catch. If you were hit by the traps or hazards in the vault, you would lose 1 stack. This incentivized players to actually pay attention to their surroundings as opposed to just mindlessly blasting through the vaults. At the end of every vault was something called a death room. Several different waves of traps and hordes all converging and swarming at you, and you have to stay alive while making sure to kill everything in the room. Man, I remember having a ton of fun in these death rooms. My very first character was a necromancer that used Bone Storm with Lidless Wall to cast Bone Storm all over the room and just destroy everything. It was carnage, and I loved it. Other than Waltz, Season 3 also gave us our very own companion, long before mercenaries were a thing. Seneschal Companion was a robot construct that followed us around, was invulnerable, and had many different abilities that complemented our build. It could deal damage, crowd control monsters, apply status effects, and even support us directly by healing or providing us with a damage bonus. We used something called governing and tuning stones to customize our robot companion, which we collected in the vaults. These stones came in various rarities and flavors, and there were a total of 12 governing and 27 tuning stones, allowing for a ton of customizability and depth. My favorite was a unique tuning stone, Evernight, that gave us +4 to all skills, essentially the same as having an extra Shaco. At the beginning of the season, community was critical of the companion mechanic as they thought it wasn't powerful or impactful enough. But by the mid-season, players realized just how powerful these seneschal companions are and how much they increase the value and the power of our builds. The main antagonist, Malphas, was a powerful boss that came in two variants. The one you killed during the seasonal questline, which was fairly easy, and an Uber variant, which was far more challenging. Killing the Uber variant also provided unique tuning stones. There was also an upgraded version of the Butcher called Son of Malphas, which was a random encounter that could happen inside these vaults, which often resulted in a hard fight. Besides these vaults, there were also events in the overworld called Arcane Tremors. Entire areas of the world were hijacked by construct enemies. In these events, players collected something called elemental cores from towers and constructs, which we then deposited into a braziers to summon waves of enemies and ultimately face the Herald of Malphas, a mini-boss similar to Blood Maiden in Helltides. Heralds dropped the pearls of warding that were crucial for progressing further into the vaults. Despite all of this, general community reception for Season 3 was mostly negative. Some people even saying that mechanics such as traps have no place in an ARPG, which I think is complete bullshit. While I surely enjoyed this season more than people who played the game from the very beginning, as it was during Season 3 that I played the campaign, main story, and made my first character, I still feel that time has vindicated this season a little bit and proved that it was unfairly judged. Certain mechanics such as build your own companion and dungeons that force you to dodge the hazards were ahead of its time as far as Diablo 4 is concerned, and there is a growing sentiment on places such as Reddit to bring back some of these elements back. I myself would love Vault being brought back in some way, as well as Malphas, who was such a cool boss and antagonist. Overall, this remains one of my favorite seasons, but because the game was in a much more shallow state back then than it is now, I cannot place it any higher on this list. Still, it's gonna go on the top of the B tier. And now we are in the top 3. Number 3, Season of Loot Reborn, Season 4. And we're starting off with a season that many consider to be the best of them all. It began on May 14th and ended on August 7th, 2024. Season of Loot Reborn was, as the name suggests, the first major overhaul to the core systems in Diablo 4 since its release. At the time, gameplay was rather stale. The only real endgame content, if you can call it like that, was Duriel and farming for the mythic uniques that were, back then, extremely rare to get. For the game to be successful, it just had to offer more. While most seasons in the game featured its own questline and mechanics, for Season 4, devs focused on overhauling core game systems, itemization, and endgame changes instead. And that turned out to be the right approach. Seasonal fluff should be an icing on the cake. A great addition to an already polished game, not a sole focus for the development team. If the cake isn't good, the icing ain't gonna save it. So in essence, the entire theme of the season was to introduce important sweeping changes that will persist long after the season is over. two most important changes introduced to the game was the massive overhaul of the crafting system by introducing tempering and masterworking. I won't waste too much of your time talking about them as they're still currently in use and you likely know what these systems are. But tempers allowed for up to 2 extra affixes to be imprinted onto items, while masterworking increased all of the item's affix values with a chance to crit or increase by additional 25% every 4th time, up to 12 masterworking ranks or 3 crits. This was a huge upgrade from the previous system, where basically all we could do is take an item to the blacksmith, click upgrade a couple of times, and that's it. These systems were a huge game changer and introduced some actual depth to the game's itemization and gameplay, for perhaps the very first time. Other than tempering and masterworking, Season 3 introduced more changes to the items, such as reducing the base affix count to 3, but making the affixes more valuable and impactful. This was also the first introduction to greater affixes. Greater affixes are 50% more powerful than their regular counterparts. They always roll their maximum value and can only appear on essential items. Now let's talk about the Codex of Power. If you haven't played Diablo 4 before Season 4, you might be wondering what I'm talking about. So let's get back in time a little further. Before Season 4 changes, imprinting legendary aspects onto an item was no easy task. All we have to do now is go to our nearby occultist and slam it in. But in Season 3 and before, things worked very differently. If you found an item with the aspect you wanted, but you wanted that aspect on a different item, then you had to go to the occultist, who would then extract this aspect for you as a one-time consumable, destroying the item in the process. This consumable, similar to a sigil, would actually occupy space in your inventory. Not only that, but it was single use only. That's right, if you messed up or wanted to use it again, well, sucks to be you. You gotta find the item with the right aspect again. The only way around that would be to unlock the aspects permanently by doing a dungeon associated with them. But even then, you will only be able to imprint the absolute minimum value of the aspect to the Codex of Power. Here's an example to demonstrate what I mean. Let's say you want to imprint Edgemaster's aspect on your ring, which rolls from 5 to 20% extra damage. You did the dungeon and you can imprint it, but you can only print the lowest value of 5%. If you wanted higher than that, you had to find the item in the wild to extract the better aspect value from. There were so many issues with that system. It was very clunky, occupied inventory space needlessly, and ultimately relied on RNG to get the upgrade. So Season 4 did away with all of that and changed the codex to the way it works now. You simply salvage the item to upgrade the aspect on your codex, and the times of aspect sigils belong to the past. Other than massive changes to the itemization and the codex, Season 4 did tremendous upgrades on Hell Tides as well. Basically, all the things you enjoy in Hell Tides today was introduced back then. Everything from threat generation to Hellborn to Blood Maiden fight itself was introduced in Season 4. Before that season, Hell Tides were just another activity in the game that just sat there in the corner, and people mostly didn't pay too much attention. Nor was it a particularly fun or rewarding experience. But in Season 4, it turned into probably the most fun activity in the game. Not only were the above mentioned changes great on their own, but Season 4 also introduced something called a Profane Mind Cage, a new elixir. Consuming the Mind Cage juiced up Hell Tides even further by up to 3 times, making enemies a lot harder but providing better rewards and cinder generation. Playing through Hell Tides in Season 4 is some of the best fun I've ever had in the game, and Profane Mind Cages were a great part of that. Unfortunately, even though we did ask, we never got them back in the game after the season ended. Woo! So that's a lot of great changes. Is there anything else important about this season? Oh, I don't know. What about the goddamn pit? That's right, the Pit of Artificers made its debut in Season 4. A brand new activity in the game modeled after Greater Rifts in Diablo 3. The Pit is a scaling, randomly generated challenge dungeon that allows players to compete in difficulties past what the normal gameplay offers. During Season 4, the Pit was the only source of masterworking materials tying in well with the crafting changes introduced with masterworking. Future seasons moved glyph leveling to the pit, and masterworking became part of Nightmare Dungeons and Infernal Hordes instead. Season 4 was probably the biggest landmark of the game so far, as it effectively laid a foundation to most things that we enjoy about Diablo 4 even today. Core systems such as tempering and masterworking are still in use, virtually unchanged, although with Season 11, that will change as well. All in all, it's easy to understand why people think this is either the best or one of the best seasons the game has had so far. It has also proven that players don't need or want fancy seasonal quests and mechanics, and that we would much rather prefer bold upgrades to the game instead. Based off the impact alone, this season would easily take the top spot. But I still feel that the next two seasons are slightly better, to me at least. Tier A. Number 2. Season of the Witchcraft, Season 7. This is probably going to be the most controversial pick of the list. Season 7 ahead of Season 4 and everything that I just talked about? But you know what? It's my list. Season 7 launched on January 21st and ended on April 29th, 2025. The main storyline puts the Tree of Whispers into focus. Someone had been stealing heads from the tree. The rogue heads are desperate to claim new bodies for themselves to try to become human again. But without the tree, they are incomplete, fragmented, and mad. The heads began spreading madness to the creatures of Sanctuary, as anything they touched was twisted into grotesque abominations called the Head Rotten. We are then approached by the witches of Havizar to help track down the culprit, and in exchange, we get to add some sick witch powers to our arsenal. Season 7 was the first one after the second season to feature the now infamous seasonal power mechanic. But it did so in a way that felt fresh, fun, and unique. Basically, the devs took the Witch Doctor from Diablo 3 and went, ooh, free real estate. And honestly, I'm not even mad. Diablo 3's Witch Doctor is one of the most fun classes in the entire franchise. I absolutely loved the Witch Doctor, and it's a shame that we don't get to see them in Diablo 4. Witch Doctor added a note of a much welcome humor to what is usually a gritty gothic fantasy game. One of my favorite things in Diablo 3, for example, was using a set that turned you into a super fast chicken and just zooming around the game while monsters explode around me. So injecting some of that flavor into Diablo 4, hell fucking yeah. The witchcraft powers came in several categories: Eldritch, Psyche, Growth and Decay, and the last category were the so-called Lost powers, which tended to be the most powerful. Most powers could be simply bought at the area next to the Tree of Whispers by using the seasonal currency, but Lost powers had to be found by locating the altars that could spawn in Nightmare Dungeons and the Pit. I loved that, as it actually incentivized players to engage with the dungeons in the game, as there was something of value to be found. The powers used this gorgeous interface that was super simple, just slot in available powers. 5 of them are normal, and the last one is unique and had a more powerful effect. You could level the powers on the spot as long as you had enough season currency. Devs really went all in when designing these seasonal powers. They were so creative and fun to use, and they remain some of my favorites to this day. For example, frog servants, fire bats, or even a goddamn piranhado. Or maybe my personal favorite, just for how wacky it was, the cycle. Anytime we dealt damage, there was a chance for a flower to grow from the ground. That flower would damage enemies or heal allies and then disappear after use. It's things of that nature that really stuck with me because it was so creative. Leveling up our powers also unlocked their secondary effect. For instance, the power grow made our summoned units grow in size and gain extra damage whenever we cast an ultimate skill. But at rank 11, our summons also gained 100% crit strike chance whenever they were enlarged. But powers themselves, while very fun and visually appealing, were only one half of this system. The other half that really fleshed out the seasonal theme were the occult gems. Occult gems worked in tandem with the witchcraft powers and created even more depth and opportunities for customization. For example, one of the most popular gems was the Witching Hour. That said, while you have 3 or more Eldritch Witch powers slotted, The next core skill you cast gains the Eldritch tag. So now, if you want to take advantage of that bonus, you wanted to make sure to carefully choose which powers you have selected in order to benefit from that. And then, your second gem could be Wicked Pact, which gives our Eldritch Witch powers more potency. And this now applies to our core skills as well. It's things of this nature that create more depth and more ways to play the game. And while witch powers and gems were amazing, what if I told you that my favorite thing in the entire season was the open world content? Yes, really. Of course, I'm talking about the headhunt zones. Headhunts were a new activity similar to Helltide, where zones shaded green appeared around the map for a duration of the time. Great thing about Helltides was that each zone had different duration, which meant that you could clear everything in one zone and then jump straight into another. Headhunt zones were all about doing bounties and collecting grim favor. And to that end, we got dozens of new whisper activities in the game that were exclusive to the season. For example, one of them would be to escort wildlife to safety, or to kill the enemies in the area, or to follow a wisp to a certain location while enemies spawn. Enemies in the zone were called Head Rotten, and they were generally a much harder challenge than other monsters in the difficulty, especially the Head Rotten captains that could one-shot characters not prepared enough. There was a lot of bounty to be earned in that area. So to keep things fluid, we got a unique mechanic for that season, Raven of the Tree. These ravens would spawn in every headhunt zone, and you could simply turn in the bounty cache at the spot, as opposed to having to teleport back to Tree of Whispers. I loved that. What a simple yet great addition to keep the action going and not interrupt the flow of the gameplay. This raven was later added to major towns, but I still don't understand why there isn't a raven in every bounty area of the game. But the real attraction of the headhunt zones was the fugitive. As players complete bounties within the headhunt, they will reveal exposed roots which can be pulled to spawn enemies and provide loot. Sometimes these roots would spawn an uprooted cocoon, which would then lead to a fight with a new mini-boss. Most of the time, these bosses would be headless husks that we would kill for 5 grim favors and other goodies. But every once in a while, they would spawn with the head. Killing them granted us a fugitive head, which was an important material for crafting the occult gems. Head Rotten Boss was a really cool fight, and added even more variety to an already action-packed area of the headhunts. Other than headhunt zones, there were also something called Silent Woodholds, small seasonal dungeons that were activated with the Whispering Wood sigil. Besides new powers, gems, and zones, Season 7 was home to some quality of life changes as well, most notably the Armory, something the players have been begging for ages, and it finally arrived in Season 7. And of course, more unique items for all classes. In terms of long-term impact to the game, it's hard to put Season 7 ahead of Season 4. However, I just loved the season theme so much. I loved the powers, I loved the new gems, zones, and I just found myself having a lot of fun. It also didn't hurt that some of my favorite builds of all time in Diablo, like the Cataclysm Druid, were at their peak in that season. It's a period of the game that I remember fondly, and for that I will put it at the very top of Tier A. Number 1. Season of Infernal Chaos, Season 10. And this leads us to the very best season of them all. The current one! Isn't that nice? Of course, if you've seen my last video where I talk about Season 10 and the future of Diablo 4 in general, then this isn't really a surprise. Season of Infernal Chaos was released on 23rd of September 2025. The game has slowly been improving over time with more content and more quality of life upgrades, which finally peaked in Season 10. The biggest star of the season is, of course, the Chaos Armor. Unique items that can be worn in different slots than usual. This allows for some truly interesting and unique builds to shine, and perhaps for the first time ever in Diablo 4, some actual theory crafting. For someone like me who loves making builds and build guides, this has easily been the best thing Diablo 4 devs have ever done. It's such a simple yet elegant way to increase build diversity and complexity of gameplay. I even made a goddamn Devourer build on the PTR for this season, just because I could. It still sucked, however. I love almost everything about the Chaos Armor, from the color and the art to the fact that they're also account bound. This means that the game turned into sort of like a light version of solo self-bound, with most powerful items in almost any build being account bound. All the Chaos Armor and Mythic Uniques not being tradable forces players to actually play the game as opposed to just trading. And don't get me wrong, I don't mind the trading at all, but I have always felt it should be just a tool to complement the base game, as opposed to the be-all and end-all of the late game itemization. So the fact that we have to earn these items means something. But speaking of trading, they've actually gone and done it. The Mad Lads just quietly and behind the scenes fixed the duping and botting issues that were so prevalent in the game for so long. I talked about this topic quite often, and I placed Season 9 dead last just for how bad it was. And after Season 10 launched, I expected more of the same. Hitting the Diablo trade to see 10,000 husks locked and loaded and ready to go. But there weren't any. I was pleasantly surprised by this, and this meant that the value of in-game gold for the first time actually mattered. I found myself caring for how much gold I had, and even choosing game activities to earn it. I went for gold caches in Infernal Hordes for the very first time since ever. And even the best items in the game sold for maybe a couple of billions, as opposed to 10,000 legendary runes. Speaking of hordes, this is officially what the current season is all about. Infernal Hordes were already one of the strongest activities in the game, but in Season 10 they decided to significantly improve upon them. Before this season, Horde suffered from the lack of diversity, especially when it comes to building the boons and the banes. It was all about how to get as many Hellborn buffs as quickly as possible. So in Season 10, they completely flipped the script on that. What I love about the current Hordes is that the game rewards you for building on top of your previous choices. For example, Soulspires might start out slow, but take enough multipliers and you can actually get a great run just with the Soulspires, something that previously would not have been even remotely possible. Another great thing are the Chaos Waves, which I really hope will stay in the game. It keeps the gameplay fresh, and if you hit that jackpot and get the Goblin Wave, oh man, it's so good. It's so satisfying. And that's what I want in my game. I want these satisfying moments to be possible, and I want the dopamine to hit me when they do happen. And then there's the Bartok fight. I like Bartok. It's another good addition to Diablo 4 Bestiary. I thought the fight was fun. You have these mini wormholes, kind of like portals, that you have to interact with, and that way you can dodge the elemental hazards that are thrown your way. Of course, if you're powerful enough, you're still gonna one-shot Bartok, but if you're not, then it still makes for an interesting fight. And as if all of that wasn't enough, there's still so much more to Season 10. Chaos Rifts, for example. Love them. What a simple yet elegant way to increase the replayability of dungeons, hell tides, and other in-game activities. On surface, it's a very simple idea. You click on a thing, a portal opens, you kill the monsters, and you get the loot. Bam. But the rifts just make every in-game activity they're in so much better. It just goes to show that you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes a simple solution works really well. I also really like that the rift content is a lot more difficult than the rest, so it gives players a proper challenge from the very beginning of their journey. The only downside to Chaos Rifts is that I found myself skipping pretty much all Nightmare Dungeons without them, and I felt that things such as Nightmare Dungeons and especially Strong Rooms really fell off in Season 10. And of course, we have to talk about Chaos Perks. While the seasonal powers from Season 7 are still my favorite, Chaos Perks are just pure, unmitigated, well, chaos. And I love it. Balanced? Abso-fucking-lutely not. Fun? You betcha. Everything from Necros spamming ultimates to Sork's Mana Shield, Chaos perks have been a huge win this season as well, and they've been so amazing with complementing the current season. I love that they went to a different approach and made the perks into passives instead of active abilities, which works surprisingly well with the Chaos Armor to unlock builds that were previously just not possible. And on top of that, we also gotten Whisper Indicator on the sigils, something that I asked for like a solid year and a half by now. All in all, the current season is a huge win for the game. The only real downside is that what comes up must come down again. This has been the season of the power creep, and it is unrealistic to expect this kind of gameplay and player power going forward. Next season brings a lot of important changes to the game mechanics, and that, in combination with Chaos Armor and perks not being in the game anymore, will result in a drastic difference in player power. Based on my playthrough of the Season 11 PTR, I estimate we will do about 20% of the damage we do now. Not everyone will like that, but more than the damage values themselves, the void that the Chaos Armor and perks leave in terms of sheer build diversity and sheer amount of viable builds will be left unfilled. And that, to me, is the bigger issue. But overall, this season is definitely Diablo 4 at its absolute peak, and I hope we get many more like it. S tier all the way, baby. And there you have it. This has been the complete rundown and ranking of all the seasons of Diablo 4 that I've played so far. I try to keep it as fair and objective as possible, but as with any ranking, there's always going to be some personal preference in the mix as well. But what do you think? Do you agree with my choices? Or do you think that I missed the mark? Which seasons are your least and most favorite out of all of that you played so far? Let me know down in the comments. And if you like this kind of content, drop a like to the video and sub to the channel, as it really helps me out tremendously. Your support is very appreciated. I have big plans for this channel by the end of the year, including start of my very first stream and more, so stay tuned for that because I will be having announcements pretty shortly about that. Anyway, I hope you have a good day. I'm Fallen Messiah, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.